So, Steve, you have good knowledge of what it's like to be at this point, 2 weeks going into a campaign. How worried, or should Democrats be worried about these early voting numbers that so heavily favor the Republicans?
Yeah, look, yes, they should be concerned. The early voting appears to be favoring Republicans, although right now we don't have any empirical evidence as to whether those Republicans are voting for somebody at the top of the ballot and then voting for Democratic candidates down ballot.
But if you have an 18, 22-point advantage,
it's a matter of concern. But
yeah.
Look, let's put this in perspective. Right now, there are 65 districts on the House battlefield. The Democrats need 23 seats. There are 65. Republicans are defending 60 of those 65. Democrats are defending 5 of those 65. So the energy continues and the momentum continues to be with Democrats. These races always tighten up at the end. This is what keeps a chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee up at night. Every gray hair on this head is.
You earned it?
They all grew in the last 2 weeks of the midterm election in 2014. This is when races get really close. You have black swan events, district that you didn't think you had to worry about, and now you have this caravan of fear.
Okay, so maybe in this totally unpredictable political world, that's part of the predictability, that races do tend to tighten at the end, Susan. So let me ask you about all these lies that the president keeps telling, and Jeff did a good job of laying them out. You know, tax cuts are coming. There are dangerous Middle Easterners who are in the middle, M13 in the middle of this caravan, rioting in sanctuary cities that no one has seen, no one knows anything about. So we asked Sarah Sanders about it. Listen to what she said.
Why is he saying things that aren't true so often lately?
I don't think he is. I think the president is laying out a clear case of the difference between Republicans and Democrats. We've seen him do that a lot over the last couple of days, and I think we'll see him do that over the next 15 days.
Is this just Republicans acquiescing and saying, you know what, I'm with him no matter what?
To some extent, but I'd like to say that I believe that President Trump is not giving forward these lies because he cares about the candidates that he's out there campaigning for. He is doing this looking ahead to 2020. When he says, I'm going to put out a middle-class income tax, he's not doing that to rouse support for this election. He's looking forward saying, oh, I bet the Democrats take the House, and I will blame the House when it doesn't happen, which is good for him as an electioneer campaign issue.
Are you saying that you think that the President of the United States wants the Republicans to lose the House?
No, I think he's resigned himself to the fact, like many Republicans, frankly, that the House is probably going to flip because of the numbers that Steve gave. It's kind of obvious there. Plus, in those numbers, you have a lot of Republicans that have there's a lot of Republican open seats, so you don't have the power of incumbency in those congressional districts. So I think he's looked at it, and the way he's campaigning is, I know I've lost the House. I'll do everything I can to increase perhaps the margins in the Senate. And he's also focused on the one thing that matters most to him, himself.
All right.
That's looking at 2020.
So, Shannon, let me read to you part of a Washington Post article that talks about one of these examples we've been talking about, the caravan. Quote, Barry Bennett, former Trump campaign advisor, described the caravan as a political gift. Quote, I wish they were carrying heroin. I wish we had thought of it. It speaks to the dearth of our creativity. Unfortunately, Bennett said, there are 7,000 people marching toward the U.S. border. One party wants to let them in. The other party wants to keep them out. That's the message, essentially. Those last sentences are the president's message to folks. You've got to be afraid of the Democrats because we want to keep them out. They want to let them in. Is it working?
So, well, I mean, we'll see in 2 weeks. But there's a clear shift in strategy from the White House and from Republicans to shift to this fear and American carnage portrait of what will happen if the Democrats win. This is your tried and true stoke up the fear at the end of the midterm elections. And when I was talking to people a month ago, 2 months ago, it didn't necessarily seem like the messaging was going to go this way. But I think it's almost a messaging of last resort, because they wanted to emphasize the economy and tax cuts. And until about a month ago, Republican apathy was just incredibly low. There was just very little interest from the Republican base in these midterms. The president wasn't on the ballot, and people just really didn't have interest in their local races. Then you had Kavanaugh come, and in the White House, they felt a flip immediately in Republican energy and that sort of momentum. But you can't keep that going in this type of news cycle for the next month. So it was the question, what was the next thing going to be? And while this message of fear in immigration has been one that the president has drawn on, for his entire political career almost, it was that moment that he really ignited his base when he started coming out against Mexican immigrants and Muslims with the Muslim ban, and he's going back to it again in these final 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean,
so I think it's all going to be doom and gloom. Yes, and if Democrats win.
These pictures are a gift, because that little kid who's sipping his cup looks dangerous to me. Steve, so you've got on the flip side, Democrats focused on health care. 6-8 months ago, I was talking to folks about the research, the internal research. The Democrats said they had never seen a single issue that kept popping as a major motivator for voters the way this has. But again, in this cycle, sticking to that, not calling out the president on the lies, not calling out the president on the riots and the dangerous people in the caravan, or even the tax cuts, is it a mistake?
Look, a good message is a message that resonates locally. The Democrats, the nature of a midterm election is you've got 65 separate campaigns, and a message on health care that may work in Brooklyn, New York, may or may not work in Brooklyn, Iowa. So you've got to have messaging.
Well, I think the Democrats argue that pre-existing conditions works everywhere.
Well, it's polling effectively across the board. But let me make a point on this very important caravan of fear. Look, there's a precedent to this fear tactic that this administration is using. You know why the Republicans did so well in the midterm election in 2014? Ebola. Because for the 2 weeks before that election, all anybody was talking about was the likelihood that Ebola was coming to a hospital near you. Now, they can't deal with Ebola now. And so this caravan of fear is the new Ebola. Republicans message to voters emotions. They message to that part of the brain that triggers emotion and fear. And
but
what we Democrats do...
Let me make the other side of the argument, or let David Brooks, because he writes in the New York Times this. The Democratic campaign is inadequate to the current moment. It offers no counter-narrative to Trump, little moral case against his behavior, no unifying that a lot over the last couple of days, and we'll see it over the next 15 days. I mean... No argument against ethnic nationalism. In politics, you can't beat something with nothing.
You can beat something with something that counts in a specific district. I talk to my former colleagues in places like Southern Illinois, in competitive districts, and they say, you know, when I do a town meeting, when I do a supermarket, standing in a supermarket, people are not talking about Donald Trump. They're talking about soy. They're talking about what's happening on their farms. They're talking about health care. They're talking about the cost of education. They don't want me to talking about Donald Trump. They want me talking about them. Those are the districts where you have to focus on constituents issues, not Donald Trump.
Right, and let's not forget the Ebola issue was not as divisive. That was actually a healthcare fear. That wasn't necessarily a divisive racist issue, frankly, that the president has jumped on. And the Democrats this cycle, I think, versus 2016 or 2014 in the midterms, have put up better individual candidates for their districts. They've learned a lot from the special elections through 2017. The Republicans who are in trouble need to walk the line of supporting some of the president's initiatives like the tax cuts, because they are popular with the base within their districts, and yet not seeming to be this hate monger that the president represents to suburban middle class women.
You know, one of the things that we see time and time and time again, and we all wish we had the concession, are the MAGA hats, Make America Great Again. So I want to ask you, Shannon, before we go, about this nationalist issue, because again, the president brought it up last night. Take a listen.
A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
And they cheer for that. I mean, he is sticking to the stuff that got him to the dance in the first place, right?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. I had heard in the past few rallies sort of bringing up this globalist message. I mean, he does a lot of testing messaging at these rallies and sort of tweaking it and perfecting it. So I think that this was sort of a conscious move towards embracing this nationalist identity. I mean, put aside that, you know, our nation is on a globe that interacts with other nations. I don't even know what the real understanding of people in that audience is of nationalists. But yes, it is about the base. I mean, the cliche thing, it's all about turnout. It's about turning out Trump's base. And Democrats have to turn out young people, Hispanics, and women. Trump needs to turn out his base. He needs to get them enthusiastic and get them to vote for a local candidate they might not be enthusiastic about, because he is got to put his name on the ballot in a way in order to get turnout.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.